Just, I suppose, to clarify some confusions in the programme, I'm not actually Anne Scott. So at the moment it is reading that the chairperson is the Professor Anne Scott, who's the Vice President for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in NUI Galway, but Professor Scott is not well and I'm stepping into her position. And I'm in the School of Law. I'm also the Vice Dean for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion within this college. And so I'm just replacing Anne for the day. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce, I think, the first session in our 10 years of disability summer school that is going to be held through the medium of Spanish. So since it's on intersectional discrimination, now there are translators present, but this is our first international session in that regard. So we're very pleased to have that. I'm just introducing the speakers today. So if I'm going to introduce the three speakers, then Nena Guerrenzi, who's the first speaker I'm going to introduce, is going to facilitate this morning's session. So Nena is a trained lawyer in human rights and social protection, and she has been working with the Age Platform Europe and an EU network which aims to voice and promote the rights of 190 million citizens aged 50 plus in the European Union. I'm sure there are some that she is representing within the room today. And to raise awareness on the issues issues that concern them most. She's currently finalising her PhD on human rights of older persons here in NUI Galway. And she has also participated in the drafting of the Council of Europe recommendations on the rights of older persons and has consulted the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And she's also involved in the political process around the new UN Convention or proposed Convention on the Rights of Older People. The next person I'm going to introduce is Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes. And Maria is the Special Envoy of the Secretary General on Disability and Accessibility of the United Nations since 2017. She is a law professor and researcher, and we're one of these very fortunate situations. She was a chairperson of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities within the United Nations from 2013 to 2016. So we have Teresa Dejner here at the start of the week, the current chair, and who knows, maybe we have a future chair in the audience as well with us today. So we have three of the potential chairs of the UNCRPD. And finally, and not last but not least by any stretch of the imagination, I'd like to introduce Rosa Cornflomati, who's here. She is an independent expert on the enjoyment of all human rights by older persons. She has served as the National Director of the Chilean National Services for Aging, where she has designed, implemented the National Policy on Aging. She has a long career as an academic and is the founder of a programme on older persons at the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. So again, quite a lot of overlap because we're, in this institution, one of the founders of the first disability LLM. So again, some great overlaps here today. I'm handing the floor over to Nena, who's going to take charge of this session, and I hope you all enjoy it.
Okay, makes sense. Good morning, everyone. I'm very honored to be joined here today by two of the most prominent experts that we have at a global level on disability and on aging. Before I give them the floor, like Siobhan mentioned, this panel will take place in Spanish and in English. So Maria Soledad will be speaking in English and Spanish with the help of the interpreter, and Rosita Cornflomati will speak mainly in Spanish, but the interpreter will be translating for us. And of course, after both of them have spoken, we will open the floor for comments and for questions. I'm sure that despite the practical inconvenience, will be all very much gained from the depth of the discussion that we can have in their native languages. Now, a couple of introductory remarks from my part, just to contextualize a little bit the intersectionality between aging and disability. The first one is that when we're talking about this issue, we have to take into account that we're talking at least about two groups. So on the one hand, we have persons with disabilities that are aging, and on the other hand, we have those people that acquire disabilities for the first time in old age. Now, these two groups face some similar and common challenges, but sometimes they also face distinct challenges. So we've seen, for example, in practice that certain services or benefits may no longer be available after a certain age, or these services or benefits may be severely cut after a certain age. And this can either affect both groups or one group. For example, if this service is no longer available when disability first occurs in old age. And to give you an example of that is we've seen in many European countries that the support to live independently, in particular, I'm thinking of schemes of personal assistance, are sometimes targeting people of working age. So those older people who acquire disability in old age are often barred from applying for these services, or they are given a lot less support in practice. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that people with disabilities that have lifelong disabilities may have accumulated disadvantages throughout their lifetime. We know that on average, they have had fewer opportunities to participate in society, to participate in work and in education. And of course, these disadvantages accumulate and might also exacerbate in old age. And the other example I want to bring is one that we also see, at least in the European context, where we see a general trend to deinstitutionalize services for younger persons with disabilities, but we do not see necessarily the same trend when we look at services for older people. So we still have big institutional facilities, but also we have institutionalization at home environments, in the home, because we lack formal care arrangements, formal support arrangements for older people, which means that they might have support to cover for their basic needs, like to get bathed, to get dressed, to eat, but not necessarily support to get out in the community, to participate, to interact with others. And this is because often we do not conceive disability in old age as a disability, but just as a normal part of life. And this leads me to my last point, which is that whereas thanks to the CRPD, we have a concept of discrimination on disability, we have managed to shed the light on disabilities. Currently, we do not have a convention on the rights of older people, and neither do we have, under international law, an explicit prohibition of age discrimination. Instead, what we have is a lot of exceptions in practice in the rule of age equality. So we have from accepting mandatory retirement ages as legitimate to a complete disregard by international instruments of how age limits might affect access to training, to education, to health screenings, to disability benefits, among others. So we see that the experiences of ageism and how these intersect with those of disability remain to a large extent invisible in law and in practice. And because we have been exposed to stereotypes around old age for too long, we fail to see the injustice and the suffering in old age, and we do not give it the same weight as we would give it to other forms of discrimination. So just to conclude, this is the complicated context in which we are working in today's discussion, and I would like to encourage all of you to take this into account for today's discussion. So without any further ado, I will give the floor to Maria Soledad.
Good morning, friends. Thank you to the organizers for the invitation to participate in this summer law school, and especially taking account the invitation of Latin American experts, because we represent a different view, perhaps, from our region. Now, we would like to speak about different difficulties that face some kinds of persons. At the beginning, ableism. What is ableism? This concept refers a stereotype, prejudice, and harmful practices against persons with disabilities, including discrimination. Examples in the daily life. Students with disabilities are not convenient in the regular school, in the class, because they are bad for the process of learning of other students. Persons with disabilities are not efficient workers, etc. And on the other hand, we face the concept of ageism. And what is this? This concept refers stereotype, prejudice, and harmful practices against persons in relation to the age, particularly older persons, including discrimination too. And some examples of the daily life. Infantilization, older persons are as a children. They are not need space for the intimacy as a couple. In the concept of some physicians, they are inflexible and it's not convenient, the psychotherapy. It's preferable to use medicines for them. Taking into account this kind of phenomena, we ask about which are the negative effects of this phenomena in the life of the persons. First, invisibility. Second, resignation. The life is in this way. Third, violation of human rights and fundamental freedom. Fourth, bad treatments. In some cases, cruel and inhuman treatments in relation to older persons. And what can we do to fight against this kind of phenomena? Obviously, the cultural change, the social change. And during this week, you listen about the topic of intersectionality as a good tool to create the cultural change. But I would like to underline that the concept of intersectionality is very useful in the environment of sociology or political scientists too. But from the perspective of human rights, legal system, and legislation, I prefer to use the concept of diversity, human diversity. All of us are different characteristics of condition, and in the legal system, for example, in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, one of the principles of the Convention in Article 3 is the respect of the human diversity. And the fourth aspect, what can we do to protect, to promote, protect, and ensure the full and effective enjoyment of the human rights of persons with disabilities and for older persons? Obviously, the answer will be improving the legal system. And in this case, I would like to express briefly the experience of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. In this case, we can say that it is an instrument that fight against ableism. And it is an effective instrument, legal instrument. You know that it counts with 177 ratifications, and almost 70 state parties count with concluding observations of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities with specific recommendations for the implementation of the convention, and they can receive the assistance, technical assistance of United Nations, because the support is CRPD. But at the same time, I would like to underline two important impacts of CRPD in the legal environment and in the human rights environment. First, the development, advancement, and empowerment of the civil society of persons with disabilities and their representative organizations. In my opinion, this is a very important result of the impact of the convention. You can see the incidence of the International Disability Alliance, for example, in the work of United Nations, including in the work of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Here, in the audience, perhaps there is Nicolas Rangiolo. He is a Chilean person, and he is working in the support of a civil society of persons with disabilities in the incidence of the review process for the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Other impact in the 2030 Agenda. Sustainable Development Goals with 17 SDGs. Taking into account that 5 targets mention persons with disabilities, and there are indicators that mention persons with disabilities. I would like to note that the correct name of the right holder in the line of the convention is persons with disabilities and no disabled people, or disabled only. This is a common language, but the legal nomination is persons with disabilities as subject of law. And in this moment, I ask, what is the protection to older persons? They don't count with an international instrument to promote, protect, and ensure their human rights. What happened with them? In this case, we can say that we can use all the convention in the international system. International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, CEDAW, CRC, CAT, Protection of Migrant Workers, and including CRPD. But this instrument, this treaty, no mention older persons. Only CRPD mentioned older person in 2 articles in relation to right of health, secondary prevention to avoid the progress of the disability or appears other disabilities in the same person, and in the article about social protection in terms of eradication of poverty. In other words, we can use the other instruments of human rights for older person in the matters which is correspond, but not in all matters. In relation to CRPD, some persons said we can use CRPD to protect human rights for older persons. But the nature of the rights holder is quite different. You remember that persons with disabilities involve impairment, interaction with a different barrier, restriction in the participation in the society. But older persons is all in relation to the age, 60 years old or more. Therefore, we can face a low protection for the rights of older person. If you present a case of the court, obviously the judge will receive the evidence about the impairment of a person. And you know that many older persons have not impairments. And you know that currently we count with almost 1 billion of older persons. And for 2015, we will have 2 billion of older persons. And if you let me, I would like to mention briefly what is the impact of this low protection of older persons in the system of monitoring system of the committees of human rights. If you count a human rights committee in 16 sessions, only in 0.7% there are recommendations for older persons. CRPD count with only 0.44% in relation to older persons. And connecting with 2030 agenda, the targets mention persons with older persons only in 0.7 of them. And in relation to the indicators, older persons are only in 0.4 indicators. Low impact. The conclusion. In spite of the fact we count with different instruments for the protection of human rights, in the case of older persons, the low protection produces a low impact in the human rights, in the monitoring mechanism, in the sustainable development, and finally, older persons are in a situation of weakness, especially in the representation of civil society of older persons. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria Soledad. And I think that your presentation has been very enlightening and very striking for various reasons, but in particular because you highlighted that although rights are supposed to be universal, they are not applied in a universal way in practice in the context of old age, and the numbers that you have provided us have really illustrated that. But you have also highlighted the vicious circle, I think, of ageism, which does not only lead to human rights violations, but what you mentioned as well, a type of resignation, so an internalization of ageism by older persons themselves who do not necessarily claim their rights. And you underlined also some of the shortcomings of not having, or rather in the case of the CRPD, the added value of for civil society to work within an international legal framework. And I can testify from the other perspective, from an NGO that works for older persons, that it is very difficult to advocate for the rights of older persons without such a legal framework. I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to get back to many of your rich inputs, but I would just like to give already the floor to Rosa Confalmata. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. And my apology, my English is not so well that I would like to speak. I speak better Spanish and French, so I will speak in Spanish. First of all, I would like to say thank you very much to the National University of Lion Waterway Center of Disability Law and Policy, especially to Laura, that invited me to participate to the 10th International Disability Law Summer School in Ireland, Galway. So I say that, and I will speak Spanish, but I say my PowerPoint in English, so you can see a little bit more than I can explain. Thank you very much. Voy a hablarles un poquito
I'm going to talk to you a little
sobre las diferencias
About
que
the-
hay sobre vejez y discapacidad.
about the differences in between aging and disability.
Como ustedes pueden ver ahí, hoy día tenemos 700 millones de personas adultas mayores.
As you can see there, we have today 700 millions of elderly people.
Soledad dijo mucho de estos datos, pero es bueno reforzarlos para tener la idea.
Soledad explained a lot about this data, but it's good to repeat just to keep clear the idea.
En 2050 vamos a ser 2.000 millones de personas, o sea, un 20% de la población.
In 2050, we are going to be 2,000 millions, so the 20% of the global population.
Miren cómo van ahí cambiando los países y que son los que van envejeciendo.
Take a look at how the countries are going to be changing and how they are going to be aging.
Entonces tenemos los países que van a tener más del 20% de la población en el año 2050, que son los que están todos en azul.
So we have the countries that would have 20% or more of population over 60 years in 2050, which are in blue.
Ahora ustedes pueden ver que no todas las personas con discapacidad son personas mayores,
Now
ni
you-
todas las personas mayores tienen discapacidad.
Now you can see that not all people with disabilities are older, and also not all older people are people with disabilities.
Ustedes pueden ver los números, yo no me voy a detener, el PowerPoint va a quedar aquí para poder, tengo poco tiempo y tener espacio para la conversación.
So you can see the numbers. I'm not going to explain long, but you're going to have the PowerPoint if you want to consult.
Veamos acá una imagen que a mí me llama mucho la atención.
Let's see here this image that really take my attention
En la discriminación, que
about discrimination.
primero por el estereotipo, que es
First-
lo cognitivo,
First of all, about stereotype,
y después por los prejuicios, que es lo afectivo.
and second, because of prejudice and affective.
Por ejemplo, cuando se dice las personas con discapacidad son incapaces, es un prejuicio.
For example, when people say people with disabilities are not capable, it's that's a prejudice.
O cuando se dice que las personas mayores son rígidas e inflexibles.
Or when you heard that older people are rigid and inflexible.
Y Butler en 1969 nos dijo que el ageism, que son estereotipos y prejuicios, ahí está,
So,
que son estereotipos, you can read it, maybe.
okay, thank you. Ageism, so stereotype and prejudice about older person. And ageism reflects a deep-seated uneasiness on the part of the young and middle-aged, a personal revulsion to and distaste for growing old, disease, disability, and fear of powerlessness, uselessness, and death. Butler, 1969.
Y eso es una dinámica inserta en nuestra cultura hoy.
And this dynamic is insert in our culture these days.
So, tenemos las personas mayores múltiples discriminaciones.
So we have older people and discrimination.
Por ejemplo, ser persona vieja, una.
For example, to be an old person, one.
Viejo con discapacidad, dos.
Older and with the disability, two.
Viejo, discapacidad y mujer, tres.
Older person with the disability and women, three.
Viejo, discapacidad, mujer y pobre, cuatro.
Then older plus disability plus woman and poor, four.
Y por último, podemos tener viejo, discapacidad, mujer, pobre y además institucionalizado.
And last, older with the disability, woman, poor and institutionalized.
Y así podemos seguir en múltiples discriminaciones.
And then we can go on and on in multiple discrimination.
Eso demuestra que las leyes no están preparadas para la discriminación múltiple en ningún país del mundo.
That shows that law is not prepared for multiple discrimination in any country in the world.
Entonces, ¿cuáles son las consecuencias de la discriminación?
So which are the consequences of discrimination?
Primero tenemos el maltrato, la violencia de los derechos humanos, la violación, perdón.
First of all, we have the abuse and violation of human rights.
Y después tenemos una profecía autocumplida, que es self-fulfilling prophecy,
So then we have the self-fulfilling prophecy.
que nos lleva el maltrato a prejuicios sobre las personas con discapacidad y personas mayores, lo que hace situaciones de abuso.
So abuse and violation of human rights bring us to prejudice about persons with disability and older people. This lead to situations of abuse.
Tenemos el maltrato físico, el psicológico, el patrimonial, que afecta la dignidad y el ejercicio de los derechos humanos.
So we have the psychological, physical, and patrimonial abuse, which affects the dignity and the exercise of human rights.
Hoy día uno de los más fuertes en el mundo entero es el abuso económico.
One of the strongest abuse today is the economic abuse.
Porque muchos hijos o familiares o cuidadores se quedan con las pensiones o con la casa o con los bienes, y eso es un maltrato económico fuerte para las personas mayores que no pueden decidir.
Because a lot of people today, the caretakers, family members, others, they keep the pensions of the income of these people. That's a strong economical abuse.
Por lo tanto, hay que visibilizar todo lo que sea maltrato.
So we need to visualize everything that could be abuse.
Tenemos también algunas consideraciones importantes de diferencias. Las personas con discapacidad y las personas mayores.
So we have another consideration, which is the difference in between people with disabilities or older persons.
Los recursos para las personas con discapacidad se mantienen hasta los 60.
The resources for people with disabilities are maintained until the age of 60.
Y la discapacidad es la interacción con barreras, muchas barreras.
And disability is the interaction with barriers, a lot of barriers.
Y de las personas mayores que no tenemos derechos ni recursos, y hay una pérdida grande después de los 60 años.
So for older persons, we have no resources, no rights, and there is a big lack after 60 years.
Y sobre todo, tenemos que decir que no se debe confundir la pérdida de funcionalidad, que bajan los niveles de funcionalidad, con la discapacidad.
And we need to be clear and don't confuse the loss of functionality with disability.
La discapacidad no es parte de la vejez. No debemos normalizar esto.
So disability is not a part of old age. We should not normalize this.
Por lo tanto, se deben poner especial atención a las personas con discapacidad cuando envejecen y a las personas mayores con discapacidad.
So you need to pay special attention, and this should be paid to people with disabilities as they get older and to older people with disabilities.
Conclusiones y recomendaciones.
So, conclusions and recommendations.
Primero, se requieren más datos duros para tomar decisiones.
So, you need more hard data to make decisions.
Se necesita un trabajo interseccional de aprendizaje mutuo.
So, you need international,
International job.
intersectional job of mutual learning it is needed.
In disability and older persons. Se deben generar espacios y procesos participativos como este. Hay muy pocos en el mundo.
So you need to create spaces and participative process like these that there are not much in the world.
Se necesita la transversalización de la discapacidad y la vejez.
and the transversal inclusion of disability and old age.
Por ejemplo, diseños accesibles y sociedades inclusivas.
Like, for example, accessible designs or inclusive societies.
Mayor capacitación de recursos humanos.
More training of human resources.
Ese es un punto muy importante. No es lo mismo atender, cuidar o preocuparse de alguien sin la capacitación previa.
That's very important because it's not the same to look after someone, to take care of them without the proper qualifications.
Se necesita una educación desde la primera infancia en prevención de la discapacidad y buen envejecimiento.
So education is needed from early childhood in prevention of disability and good aging.
Por ejemplo, cuando uno es joven, tiene 20, 30, 40 años, entonces necesita saber cuáles son las prevenciones para tener un mejor envejecimiento y una mejor vejez.
Like, for example, when you are young, like 18, 20 or so, you need to know what to do to have a good aging.
Entonces aquí tenemos los dos gráficos que son personas con discapacidad y personas mayores.
So here you can see the two graphics with persons with disabilities or older person.
La Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad existe.
The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, it exists.
Las personas mayores no tienen todavía una convención universal.
Older persons, they don't have an universal convention yet.
Los derechos de las personas con discapacidad están protegidos por esta convención.
The rights of persons with disabilities are protected by this convention.
Y para las personas mayores aún hay debilidades importantes en la protección de los derechos de las personas con más años.
So in terms of older persons, there are still important weaknesses in the protection of the rights of those older people.
Hay un arduo trabajo de las personas con discapacidad para ser visibilizadas.
It's a hard work of persons with disabilities for their own visibilization.
En cambio, en las personas mayores necesitamos todavía una mayor visibilización para ser tomados en cuenta.
Then for older people, it's needed a bigger visibilization for them to be taken in account.
Esto es un resumen muy chico, muy apretado,
This is a very tight resume,
pero en la conversación podemos ir creciendo en conocimientos.
but in the conversation we can grow about this knowledge.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosita. And I think there's a lot of convergence between what Maria Soledad mentioned and what you mentioned, Rosita, in particular about how you clearly both stated that old age is not synonymous to disability. And there are other issues where I found a lot of interest in both of your comments. And one issue that came up very strongly in both of you is the issue of visibility, or rather invisibility. So in particular, invisibility of older persons and of age discrimination within the existing human rights system, but also invisibility of the intersection of old age with other forms of discrimination, in this particular case of disability. And what you highlighted, Rosita, as well, is the normalization, on the one hand, of disability, where we accept it as normal and therefore we do not necessarily support it and offer the same level of protection, but also the normalization of human rights abuses that we accept as normal just because they happen in old age. And this is part of the culture of ageism that is embedded in society. And like you said, ageism is a concept that was only coined in 1969. So we still have a lot of learning to do and understanding and consciousness and awareness raising. And if I would add just one thing to your list of recommendations, that would be the need for human rights education. And human rights education includes, in my perspective, ageism awareness. I don't think we are there yet to understand ageism awareness and age discrimination awareness in the concept of human rights education. We should do that, but also it involves a high level of awareness and let's say training on disability rights within the aging sector, so that we can also use disability rights in the context of old age better as well, and we can better mainstream older people's rights within the existing system as well. So these are a few of my thoughts. I have some questions to ask to you, but I would just like to open the floor, if possible, now for questions and comments, and perhaps I can come back later. Thank you, both of you.